Oh, this Bible looks kind of interesting. Talks about dragons, unicorns, giants.
Lamp oil, rope, bombs? You want it? It's yours, my friend, as long as you have enough rubies.
Well, I decided I needed to have a brain hemorrhage today, so I guess I'm covering Discount Hovind. But before we get into him, let's go ahead and get into the fan art. So first of all, we have me hitting the subscriber bell in pixel art form by Valkyrie. Then we have a realistic and also very pink version of myself from Shaska. And then finally we have Would You Like Immortality, Billy? From JacandQuil. That's from an old BGR episode for anyone who remembers. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions, and let's get right into the brain bleeding.
Oh, this Bible looks kind of interesting. Talks about dragons, unicorns, giants, talking snakes. Oh, it's got to be a book of fairy tales, isn't it? No, guys. Slow down just a minute. You got to be understanding what historical context actually has to play into this.
Ah yes, the history of talking snakes. Actually, I don't think historical context is the word you're looking for.
Basically, talking snakes. People say, you believe in talking snakes, do you? I ask, well, who was that talking snake? We're discussing the devil, or Satan himself.
Alright, Discount Hovind, let's do the historically accurate thing like you're wanting to do. The author of Genesis is not the same person who authored Revelation. The connotation that Satan is actually a serpent comes from Revelation. Nowhere in Genesis does it say that Satan inhabited the body of a serpent and then subsequently cursed all serpents to move on the ground. So when you say, historically speaking, Satan was the serpent, your own book doesn't say that. And you can make the argument that, well, Revelation says it's a serpent, so Genesis saying that there's a serpent must mean that the serpent was Satan, but you need to understand, what was the word? Historical context. So if a culture, say the culture of the Israelites, had a vocal or even written tradition of saying that things that were negative were serpents because they believed that a serpent literally caused the fall of man, would it then not follow that later authors would write that Satan was akin to a serpent because they already had the habit of calling serpents foul beasts? Satan would then be called a foul beast. You see, you can't just say that because Revelation calls Satan a serpent when it's talking about the crushing fetish God has, that is in fact Satan in Genesis. These are two completely different authors, speaking from different timelines, cultures that have been radically changed from the times that they began. Now, in the evangelical sect that I grew up in, they literally called Satan a serpent and said that he was the serpent that tricked Eve in the Garden of Eden, but there are other interpretations that argue that the serpent was actually Lilith. There's a few ways you can slice this cake, and none of them specifically require the serpent to be Satan. So again, if you're going to use those words, historical context, or seek historical accuracy, then maybe you should start by, actually doing that.
This is a spiritual being, which can actually morph into anything he wants.
And even if I grant that he's a spiritual being who can morph into anything and whatever he wants, that still does not say that the serpent necessarily is him. Moreover, what is a spiritual being? That word's kind of fluffy and doesn't actually have any real solid definitions.
The Bible describes him as a roaring lion, and there are lions. Describes him as a talking snake, and there are snakes today, and also describes him as a dragon, and there definitely were dragons, aka dinosaurs. And again, possibly some still alive. They fit perfectly fine within a biblical worldview.
Okay, so sitting within a biblical worldview is not the same thing as cogent with reality. Now, I'm not saying that the Bible cannot be relied on as a sort of history text. A text that at the very least gives us the traditions of a once thriving civilization of people. But that does not mean that it in and of itself is historically accurate. Much like if 3,000 years from now, all of our technology were wiped out and new archaeologists were finding our stories, it would not follow that stories we wrote about Batman and Superman actually were chronologies of things that happened in reality. that's just not how these things work. Now, it would be historically accurate to say we had stories that involved these characters, just like it's historically accurate to say that there were oral traditions involving things like a global flood. But that doesn't mean that these things are, again, cogent with reality.
Giants? Well, pre-flood conditions caused animals, people, and plants to grow a lot larger back then. Strong electromagnetic field and hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and tons of human skeletons have been excavated to show that people got well over 10 or 12 feet tall, or even 20, or even up to 30 feet tall. You can even see the graph down in the description.
You have a graph in your description? Would have been really useful to include that in your video, but aside from the fact that pretty much every single over 30-foot tall human skeleton has been largely debunked as an archaeological hoax, let's go ahead and look at the description of your video to see what that graph is. And oh, looky there, when we pull up your graph, it's from the ronaldwiederfoot.wordpress website, where it has a graph of pictures drawn of variously sized human skeletons. Let's go ahead and look at a couple of these. So, unfortunately for this claim, when I try to look up anything involving giant skeletons, even using the keywords that are in the article that was linked so kindly in Discount Hovind's description, all I end up finding are debunks of this, because it's been a very long-going problem. For years, that people try to say that giants were once a thing in the world. But even if you try finding any of this, what you'll find is that none of these so-called giant skeletons have made their way into any scientific journals or any museums or anything of the sort. And you might say, if you're a conspiracy theorist, that this is evidence that the world is trying to hide the truth, that there were once skeletons of giant human beings everywhere. But my question is, if the experts have not found these things, and creationists have not found these things, merely argued that they are there and argued that they must be somewhere, then at the end of the day, you're making an argument from ignorance. You don't know if they're there, but your Bible has given you a pretty much foregone conclusion that they must be there, they must be somewhere, so you start from there. That's not a very healthy way to view this. It is very telling, though, without even doing any of the research that I just did, pulling anything up, which will be linked in the description below. If you look at the related articles for the WordPress website that was linked for Discount Hovind's video, you see things like Flat Earth Science and the Bible, Reptilian Angels, and then shit about constellations. This is not what you find when you're looking through actual academic journals on anything. And I'm fairly sure that Discount Hovind doesn't know what one of those looks like.
And unicorns? Well, of course, the Greek mythology that has been warped to show that there is this one horse with a horn coming out of its head. I might as well say it was completely not a horse-type animal. It could have been a certain type of dinosaur, described as a single-horned creature. Either a rhinoceros or anything else could count. But
well, at least you've got that one right. The unicorns described in the Bible were very likely rhinoceri.
Possibly a certain dinosaur that only had a single horn.
Well, it definitely wouldn't be a dinosaur, considering that when we look at the fossil record, all of the dinosaurs that we find are located in a completely different geological strata than any human being. We do not find humans and dinosaurs in the same layers, which is what you would expect to find if we actually existed at the same time as the dinosaurs of old, the large, terrible reptiles. So you can have your Dinosaur Adventureland fantasy, and I know you want to because you stan Kent Hovind and you desperately want to suck his toes, but at the end of the day, you were more on the money when you were talking about a rhinoceros.
And what about, are you talking about dragons? Well, you know, I explained to you that basically if you've seen the great seminar called Dinosaurs in the Bible, that dinosaurs were actually the dragons of history. There are thousands of legends of people killing off dragons, and pretty much, when a lot of people move into a certain area of the world, nobody wants to live next door to a dragon, so the more ferocious animals are driven off. So basically, dragons are mentioned in the Bible 35 times, and talks about the dragons in the seas. Possibly some dinosaurs are still alive today in the seas.
And some dinosaurs that are still alive today are chickens, and I eat them whenever I go talk to my favorite local colonel. No, but in reality, The thing that you think about when you're hearing a dragon, it seems to me that the Bible is using a dragon as a catch-all term for any type of giant, terrible creature. We need to have an understanding, you and I, that when we say dinosaur, we are talking about a creature that is very different from anything that would be described in the Bible, because the Bible was written by people who had a reference point that involved either creatures they talked about in their folklore, who were necessarily made up the same way we make up mythological creatures today. If you've seen Slenderman, for instance, this is a good example of this. A character who we can all debate on exactly how he operates and exactly what his dimensions are and how he looks, but at the end of the day, his home is in the annals of fiction. Many dragons that are talked about in other societies are also existent wholly in the realm of fiction. These animals are categorically distinct and separate from what we have found through geological discovery. When you say dragon, as it's referenced in the Bible, I envision any number of random-ass giant creatures that are essentially talked about as part of an oral tradition of a society, not real-life things that one day walked the earth. Just as with Slenderman, there are real people who walk the earth who are tall in business suits, but that does not mean that they are necessarily Slendermen. Likewise, there being dragons in mythological tales does not necessarily mean that these were dinosaurs.
Basically, back then, they had so many sea serpent stories and so many sea monster stories. In wooden ships, they would be going across the water quite a lot slowly. Now, with a lot of metal ships and a little more engineered, they'd be making a lot of noise through all their machines. So basically, sound travels very good underwater, right? So basically, those animals could be hearing those sounds from quite so far away that they will want to avoid those things. So,
did you just create your own headcanon as to why the dinosaurs don't want to talk to us anymore? You do realize that there are people who will still travel the sea in wooden ships today, right? There are people who are wholly sold on this embrace tradition, reject modernity thing, even as just a meme, and will go out and do things ye old-fashioned way, either because that's how they think it is better, or because they just want to do it as a form of recreation, and they don't find dinosaurs out there. Merely having people who are in metal boats today does not mean that the metal boat scared away all the dinosaurs. You've literally created a fanfiction about life, wherein exists your headcanon, where all the dinosaurs are tsundere, and it's not like they wanted to hang out with us anyway, Baka.
It's a little trickier finding dinosaurs alive in the water.
So let me get this straight. In your fanfic, in your headcanon, in your tsundere dinosaur anime, when people had more technology that made it easier for them to discover things in the water, they were somehow less likely to discover these animals that were very easy to find, apparently, in biblical times. But they still exist in the water, I would assume in the same amounts now, because it's not like we've been hunting and fishing dinosaurs into extinction or something. You literally think that because Machine-chan came to school, the dinosaurs no longer wanted to come. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Everything is anime girls now, and it makes it make much more sense.
But I just will say, Loch Ness Monster, Lake Champlain Monster, all of these evidences, even some lakes here in Japan report of some sea monsters described like dinosaurs still alive here, too.
Evidence is not pluralized that way. I don't know why this keeps happening. Every time I cover you, or I talk about Ken Ham, any of you guys, you keep on doing this. And I don't understand. It makes no sense. Evidence is already plural. Evidence is singular and also plural. That is how it works. Back to the actual topic at hand. Okay, so you are aware that having folktales is not evidence. I could make up a folktale right now about the snot monster, and it would not suddenly mean that the snot monster was necessarily a real thing in the world, nor would what I said be evidence of the fact that there was a snot monster. There are two things that are evidence. We have empirical evidence, which I would consider to be strong evidence of something, where we find its traces, its DNA, its tracks, whatever. Those are empirical types of evidence. They are real and helpful and tangible things. There's also weak evidence, which would be argumentation. Stories are not argumentation. An argument is something put in, say, syllogistic form. If I say, if A, then B, and if B, then C, if B, then D, then I say A, you would necessarily say that D has to follow if we follow this argument. That is a form of evidence. It's very weak evidence because an argument being logically sound does not necessarily mean a thing exists, it just means it should. But when you bring up a story is not evidence. A story is not something that I can look at and say, aha, this is definitely real and definitely happened.
Even in Canada, even in Europe, even in China, this is a big embarrassment for Darwinism. Cryptozoology is a clear fact to show that evolution is not part of science and is a carefully protected state religion and has never been true from the beginning. Darwin was no scientist, and might as well say the complete evidence shows the complete opposite to show that God's word is true from the very beginning. I hope that helps quite a few of you. Peace out, keep thinking, Jesus bless you, and TDFN, ta-da for now.
Well, eventually you might actually release more videos, but until that day comes, yeah, I guess ta-ta for now, JacandQuil. So, I am going to keep thinking, but it's because I kept thinking that I came to the conclusion that your god and also your dragons and also your myths were not necessarily real. You need to understand that when you say Darwinism, you need to figure out the fact that evolution as a working theory has moved very far past what Darwin understood. Now, what he understood are in fact foundational principles of the theory of evolution that we use today. They still hold largely true, but we've discovered so much more since Darwin's time. Since Darwin's time, we've discovered DNA. We've discovered the processes of genetic replication. We now have an understanding of radioactive decay, allowing us to date fossils in the record. Speaking of the fossil record, we have a greatly expanded fossil record now. We've been able to have observations of natural selection in a lab setting, not just Darwin's finches. We have evidence in the genomes of many different organisms, including humans, that have all bolstered the validity of the theory of evolution. Again, we have moved very, very far past what Darwin's, according to today's standards, very primitive understanding of evolution was. But with all that, I digress. JacandQuil, it's been a pleasure tackling you for, I believe, 10 episodes now. This could actually be episode 9. I am not entirely certain, but we're going to call it 10 because I am far too lazy to look into my back catalog to figure out when the last time I covered you was. So, with all that said, I've come to the conclusion that you have no idea what you're talking about, but you do know how to regurgitate Ken Ham and Kent Hovind, and because of that, you're very convinced that your Dunning-Kruger is not actually Dunning-Kruger. So, with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting a like button if you haven't already. If you want to support my channel and what I do, then I would implore you to please go in the description of this video, and there are a myriad ways that you can support me in there, whether it be Patreon or one-time donations, or even just sharing this video with your friends. Enjoy! I hope you all enjoy the brain hemorrhaging that is JacandQuil. Also, if you want some conversations of a very different flavor, then maybe you should consider going to check out the Sunset City podcast. It's a podcast that I am part of along with my friends Channel Pup and Game Apologist, and there we talk about Sonic the Hedgehog of all things. I know that's a bit of a weird segue after everything we talked about today, but if you've been on my channel long enough, then you know it's not the weirdest thing that's happened. So, with all that said, please consider checking out that channel. It'll be in the description below. Please consider supporting me in what I do and hitting the subscribe button. I will reiterate that again because I desperately need it. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.